Hi, good morning everyone. Thanks for joining us in this session on scaling up market gardens. My name's Amy Willoughby, I'm chairing, and I have a lovely panel with me who I'll introduce in a minute. This session on scaling up market gardens has been put together by the Organic Growers Alliance and the CSA Network in collaboration, which is great. And really it kind of aims to identify and address a situation where a lot of new growers are coming into market gardening, and there is this agroecological renaissance happening. But many of those enterprises find themselves, once they finish their startup phase, once their gardens are established, having to scale up, having to do things differently, having to adopt different business models in order to be financially viable. And that financial viability is vital for the sector in terms of ensuring that that this agroecological movement is able to look after not just the land, but the people who are working on it as well. So the issue of farm viability is really fundamental, and how people are scaling up, what they're doing to scale up is obviously varied and very dependent on the context and the farm that you're in. And this session really is about inviting our three speakers who've been through that process to come and share their learning, to share their stories, in the hope that some of this might be relevant to other farms, other enterprises in the room, and that there's important lessons that we can learn from each other. So I'd like to introduce our panel. Rita Oldenbourg is going to speak first, and she works at Pitney Farm Market Garden in Somerset. George Bennett is at Sandy Lane Farm, and Hamish Evans from Middle Ground Growers. Okay. So I'm going to hand straight over to Rita to start us off. So each of the speakers is going to speak for about 20 minutes, and then we'll open the session up to questions from the floor and from our online participants as well. Okay?
Oh, I'm going to come over here. Okay. Great. Good morning, everybody. Hello. I've been invited to come and talk about the more practical side of scaling up, so tools, planning and 12-month production. I hope that there's some useful and practicable nuggets of information for you to take away from this very short introduction. My name is Rita. I run Pitney Farm Market Garden with my partner Addy and our lovely team. We're tenant farmers in South Somerset. We're located in South Somerset. We're on a traditional mixed family farm, it's organic. Our rent is just over £6,000 a year, and this includes 4.5 acres of grade 3 land, plus 5 polytunnels, a pack shed, limited barn space, and use of a borehole. We're a wholesale operation, and about 1/3 of our produce goes via an on-site farm shop. We have one permanent year-round employee, plus 2 part-time seasonal workers in the summer months. Some of this is going to be a bit too small, sorry, but I'll talk through the slides if you can't see them. I wanted to talk about it. So in preparing for this talk, I wanted to look at our numbers to see if scaling up had been profitable for us. Last year, myself and Addy worked 3.5 days each, and paid ourselves just over minimum wage with money left over to reinvest into the business. Our turnover was nearly 100 grand, double what we took in our first year, so this is our 5th season. And we had 40 grand profit, which was the same as 2023. We feel like mechanising has been one of the major factors in us getting to this point financially. Our assumptions being that increasing mechanisation has decreased our labour bill, and I thought that our business might be able to demonstrate this really well for you, because in some ways our business is quite simple, And we also have always paid our staff. So we have working back from our wage bill, we have a record of labour hours going into the business. But unfortunately, the picture's too complicated, of course, not least because we had a baby 2 years ago. However, I think our numbers can show that if you take on more land, your production will increase, and therefore, hopefully, your turnover will increase. After our first year, we took on an extra acre, and then another extra acre after our second year. And our turnover increased by a significant 15 grand at each of those stages. And even if you don't reduce your labour hours, if you can keep your profit margin the same, then you'll be more profitable than you would be on a smaller acreage. If that makes sense. As Amy said, it does feel like within the small-scale horticulture, like market gardening sector, we're experiencing a bit of a crisis of viability. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to say that it would really feel like some research into which mixed horticulture operations in the UK context are most profitable and why it would be really valuable for our community. Okay, 12-month production, bridging the hungry gap. This is your armoury of tools for getting through the months from March through to kind of end of May. We use all of these to varying degrees, depending on what our site at Pitney has available to us. Ambient storage, I'm not actually sure that's the right term, but what I mean in this context is storing crops that don't need any additional cooling through the UK winter, so somewhere that's dark, frost-free and rat-free. So we have very limited storage at Pitney, so we don't do many storage crops, but we do have some simple plywood boxes in a barn that we keep our potatoes in until they sell out, usually mid-March. We cure our alliums and then store them in wooden crates in the field with a tin roof. We have an old refrigerated van unit, which we cure our squash in with a dehumidifier and a fan heater, really simple, and then store them over winter. They need to be kept at 10 degrees. And you can use varietal choice to extend your squash storage season. So, for example, acorn squash needs selling sooner, and crown prince will last well into the next year. Chilled storage, we've just bought a chiller. This will allow us to harvest in larger volumes in favourable conditions and store crops for longer. Standing crops, so this is what we were really fortunate with at Pitney. We had certified land right next to our market garden that we were able to expand onto. So that's what we've chosen to do a fair amount of. Winter brassicas and leeks are crucial for us bridging the hungry gap. We plant a lot of these in the same week in the summer and use different varieties with different days to maturity to manage succession. So good examples of that, as I'm sure you know, would be cauliflowers, purple sprouting broccoli, cabbages, chicories. We also have celeriac and beetroot in the ground until February, March, using straw or fleece to insulate from frost. And our last standing crop would be autumn planted spring greens, so those we're harvesting in early April. Protected cropping is super important. You can plant crops late autumn for early spring harvest or start crops very early in the tunnel. Perennial crops. At Pitney, we've just in the last couple of years planted some eating apples, again using varietal choices to manage a natural succession. And we've also established rhubarb, perennial kale beds and perennial herb beds. Overwintered crops for spring harvest early spring harvest do really well for us. We plant onions and garlic early November and mulch with straw to protect the soil and manage weeds, and we sell these late green in late April. We also do overwinter spring onions through Mypex outside. These come really nicely after the overwintered polytunnel spring onions and before the new season spring onions outside. And obviously, of course, there's broad beans. Storage crops, bottom left is the field stored cured onions, and bottom right is that's squash in our refrigerated van unit. Again, sorry, some of you might not be able to see the detail here, but I just wanted to, this is the copy of our availability list throughout the Hungry Gap, and I wanted to show that using the techniques that I've just spoken about, we managed to have at least 14 items on the availability list right the way through the Hungry Gap. We've always got salad and herbs, some sort of chenopod, allium. It shows how important our brassicas are. That's a big chunk on there is brassica plants. Late March is when we start to cultivate outside, so it's the leanest time for us from mid-March until mid-May. But we still earn almost 20% of our income in the months of March, April and May. That's just the month of May, and just to say, at the end of September, when we have a peak variety, we have over 40 items on our availability list. So a bit about the kit, moving on. So at Pitney, particular to us at Pitney, we've decided to collect a lot of bed width tools so that we can manage beds individually. This is essentially to manage compaction issues, among some other things. We're managing 4.5 acres, but we could be doing 10 acres with the same kit. In our experience, it's really paid off buying the best that you can afford. It's really demoralising and stressful when things are constantly breaking. So starting out with something half decent has really helped us to feel confident on this journey. And finally, I think this is really key, is one thing that we found really paid off is when we took on more land, is to think about scaling down techniques from field scale growers rather than scaling up small scale production. It's really worth building a relationship with a grower at a larger scale. In our experience, they've been really willing to share their knowledge, and that's been invaluable. We bought a Kubota M6040 in our first year. It's a really good all-rounder. It's 60 horsepower. It's useful to have a creeper box for transplanting. It's got a front loader, which we use to turn compost and move things around. And then on the right, that's a list of nearly all of the kit that we've bought and how much, and I just wanted to put it up there to show you that it doesn't have to cost the earth. So excluding our tractor, you could get a cheaper one. I think ours was nearly 17 grand. And then we bought a very expensive Trefler harrow this spring, which is about 8 grand or something. So excluding that, the rest of our kit has come to 8.5 grand. So it doesn't have to be super expensive. Cool. Primary and secondary cultivations at the beginning of the year. So we're trying to reduce inversion tillage. So we have 2 routes of mechanised ground prep. If the ground has had persistent plants that cannot be terminated without ploughing, without inversion, then we will plough. We're currently ploughing 1 in every 4 years, and so one block in every, anyway, you know what I mean. And always aiming to go no deeper than 6 inches. If we can get away with it instead of ploughing, we will go through with a Bomford pigtail tine cultivator. This is really just to loosen the soil so that the power harrow can get in, and again working a little bit deeper than the working depth of the power harrow, so just 6 inches ideally. After ploughing, we'll go through with a power harrow. We often need to do more than one pass to get the desired tilth, and then finally we'll roll with a 1.2 metre ring roller, which effectively marks our beds and levels and consolidates after cultivating. Great. So later in the year, when we're turning beds around, here is the tools that we use. We've got a 1.5 metre Zanon TFX flail mower. Flail mowers shred the previous crop residue or green manure, which helps it to be incorporated back into the soil. Rotavators are not an ideal tool to use. They've got these L-shaped blades which typically create a smear at the working depth. They flick soil onto a backboard, smash it to create a tilth, so they're really aggressive in that action, and they're also an inversion tool. But we have found that we've used a rotavator to great effect in the market garden. We work just up to 4 centimetres, so very shallowly, and it helps to incorporate crop residue or green manure so that it breaks down. And also, in one pass, you can incorporate large-seeded green manure at the same time, which works really nicely for us. We've got a bed width power harrow. They don't come up very often, so we just got one of those this year, which we're really excited about, and they're quite expensive, but they do allow us to prepare beds in a less aggressive way. We've got a lighter tool in the top right-hand corner. That's a bed width cultivator. It's just a set of tines with duck's feet and a crumbler roller on the back. Essentially hose the whole bed, or you can use it to create tilth. And finally, there's a spring tine harrow at the farm, which we use to weed larger areas. It's really useful, for example, after we brought in the cured onions for dragging out cooch. Planting and weeding tools. We have a Chechi Magla transplanter, and we really value it. We found that it often plants crops better than by hand. The crops seem to desiccate less quickly because of the actions of the press wheel, and it also makes mechanical weeding much easier and more accurate. Potato planters, super simple piece of kit. They come up often, they're cheap, and they make potatoes really quick and easy. Weeding. Inter-rows are easy to manage with tractors. You can easily set up tools to go up and down a bed. For example, our steerage hoe in the bottom right is a really essential piece of kit for us. Intra-row weeds are more troublesome, With some crops, for example, potatoes and leeks, you can ridge into the row with various different tool setups to smother weeds at the cotyledon stage. Finger weeders, another one, they're driven by the direction of your travel and they can flick weeds out from in between your crop. And then there's the Traffler harrow in the top right. We're still definitely getting used to it, but it's an amazing tool. It's a comb harrow that has individually sprung tines that you can control with hydraulics. It means that you can move from one bed to the next, no matter how many rows of a crop you've got on the bed, adjust the tension of the spring, and it will weed inter and intra-row weeds in one pass, and you can do that from 10 days after planting. Great. Harvesting tools. So in terms of mechanical harvesting, we've just got a potato lifter, and that feels adequate at our scale. We're not growing loads of root crops for storage, so it doesn't really justify an undercutter, and we think that would be difficult. We've got really shallow clay soil, so we think that would be problematic. We don't do a huge amount of direct drill crops, again, because of our soil, so we manage fine with a single row pterodonis and earthway for drilling. Likewise, flame weeding we do by hand with a gas canister and a backpack and a 3-headed flame weeder. And we really love our TerraTech hand wheel hose. We still do lots of hand hoeing. Finally, bringing the harvest in. We used to have a trailer for a 2-wheel tractor. That was the only thing we used the 2-wheel tractor for. And it was really great. All through the winter, it didn't shred up the ground, so we could bring the harvest in without creating loads of mud. It's broken, and at the moment we're using just harvesting trolleys and then the tractor with either a link box or a bucket on the front. Lots of information. Hope you've had your coffee, sorry. Irrigation. Okay, we're on a borehole at Pitney, and our water usage is limited by our landlords, so we would really like to improve our irrigation and ideally invest in rainwater harvesting and storage. But those infrastructures are really expensive, and it's one of the issues of being a tenant farmer, really. But we do feel like borehole water shouldn't be treated as infinite. We're currently using impact sprinklers for field irrigation. We can only run 3 at a time because of the water pressure. We'd really like a rain gun, so you could set the quantity of water that you want to be delivered, and we wouldn't have to move it so often, but our water pressure is not good enough. To improve field irrigation, the only investment that we've made at Pitney is to straighten up the route of the blue pipe from the borehole to the crops and increase and keep consistent the gauge of the pipe. So we're using lay flat hose in between the sprinklers, and that's definitely helped. But better irrigation would definitely increase yields and save us labour. So that hot summer 2022, we probably lost thousands of pounds in yield from our autumn leafy crops in yield. So yeah, it's on our list to do things. I can't talk about cultivations and mechanising without talking about soil health and what we can do to mitigate or remediate the damage done by cultivations. We need to always be thinking about reducing the frequency and intensity of cultivations, moving as little soil as possible, only working in the right conditions, reducing the work and depth, reducing inversion tillage. We also need to keep soil health principles in mind. I hope you know them all. At Pitney, we're trying to keep planting density high. We're undersowing with diverse green manures, so there's always living roots in the soil and the ground is covered. And we have sheep grazing in rotation with our top field, which is a benefit of being on a mixed farm. Biological remediation, we built a Johnson Sioux bioreactor a couple of years ago, and we're using compost extract to drench our modules before planting. Cool. I'm going to talk a little bit about crop planning, probably getting 5 minutes. Okay, getting close to the end. Cool. I'm just going to have some water, actually. Right, you're definitely not going to be able to see any of that, but that's fine, as I'm going to tell you. We feel really strongly that detailed planning in the winter is 100% worth it. It's been really key to us getting better over the past 5 years. One thing that we've developed is this master Excel spreadsheet, and we've got basically all the information we need for planting in one place. So on this spreadsheet, we have the crops, so we grow 50 crops and over 200 varieties. Sow date, transplant date, harvest start and finish. Also, we have the location, spacing, rows per bed. We've got the size of the seed tray, seeds sown per module, seeds per gram for each crop. We've got all the information we need for direct drilling crops. We've got notes for planting and notes for sowing. So it means that we can generate a weekly sow list with all the information needed that we can hand it to a member of staff and they can get on with the job. Equally, a transplant list. It makes, having all in one spreadsheet makes it really easy to make small adjustments. So if you want to increase the number of rows that you're drilling or planting to a bed, it will automatically increase the number of seeds that you need to order. If you want to adjust the days to maturity for a crop, the harvest start date will change. We also use it with pivot tables to generate new information. So we can use this spreadsheet to generate our seed order. We're also collecting and refining data on here. So for example, days from sowing to transplanting for each crop, which obviously changes throughout the year. But we're kind of collecting that data and meaning that we're always transplanting at the ideal stage. And finally, obviously, we're keeping a record of when harvests finish on different crops so that we can get our successions more tight for our market. I think it's worth saying that we really tried hard to stick to our plans and are genuinely rarely getting behind on sowing or planting. This means that at the end of the year we have dates for everything, as it's safe to assume that they went in the ground when was planned, or that we'd have a note about it. And how we manage that practically is if we see we've got a big week coming up, we get more labour in. Cool, I think I've just got one more slide. I'm going to miss that. That's our note-taking. We literally just take observations and notes throughout the year on a WhatsApp group, and then at the end of the year we'll search leaks and go back through, find any observations and use it to adjust on our overview spreadsheet. The whole team can access it. Yeah. Okay, another simple hack, finally, is that we use that provides us with a lot of very useful information is this. It's when we invoice, we label each crop sale with the succession that it has come from. This means that you can work out your yield per metre squared and also in turn what you're earning in pounds per metre squared for every succession of every crop. We found that the numbers have often been surprising, so I'd definitely say that it is worth generating this information. It gives you an indication of what you can do, what you should do more of, and what you should drop. You can also, once you've got yield data, compare this to your own baseline or to other sources like the Organic Farm Management Handbook. And I should say that often the Hungry Gap crops, in terms of pound per metre squared, come out looking quite poor, but they need some sort of skewing factor because they're obviously super valuable because of when they come in the year. And finally, this information enables you to do financial forecasting. So after our 5th season, our forecasting from the year ahead based on our crop plan is already actually surprisingly accurate. That's me. Done. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me? Good, hopefully. I'm going to try and stand up here rather than being hid behind here, so I hope it works. I'm George Bennett from Sandy Lane Farm. It's a real privilege to be here to share our experience, and I hope it will be useful. I came back to the family farm 15 years ago. In those 15 years, we've significantly upscaled our vegetable production, and in particular our market garden, which started from scratch actually. So we always used to be a field scale operation. In terms of who we are, it's a 100-acre mixed organic farm based just outside of Oxford. We are mainly we mainly do vegetable production, and the vegetable production is on a field scale, on a no-dig market garden, and protected cropping. The field scale is approximately 45 acres of cultivatable land, so not all of that is in production at any one time. The no-dig market garden is now over an acre, so we have 5 rotations in our no-dig market garden. And the protected cropping is about half an acre. So there's a lot going on. Alongside the veg, we have egg production and pigs and sheep at a small scale, but they are very much complementary to the veg production. So they feed off each other in the system. Our outlets, as opposed to, we used to be very much wholesale, but now we've gone much more direct to the customer. So we have a farm shop that's open 3 days a week on the farm. We do veg boxes, and just to give you an idea, this week our veg box number was about 410. And we do a fortnightly farmers market in Oxford, and we're also part of the Ox Farm to Fork initiative in Oxford, which is selling wholesale veg to the Oxford colleges and hopefully beyond that to local institutions in time. The size of the team, we are 4 partners and 12 year-round staff. Not all of those are full-time. And we also have integrated volunteers into our system. So that comes in 2 guises. One is customers who come and volunteer on the farm on a weekly basis. It's a really good way of building community, and I think it's heartening for me that they are getting something from our community and how the farm works, which is fantastic. And then the other element of our volunteers is that we welcome farmability onto the farm. They're a local co-farmer group that have special education needs, and they are based on the farm. They have a base on the farm. They're here with us every Thursday, but we are now looking to increase that to an extra day a week. And I think having that wider volunteer ecosystem is really important for us and for them and everyone, so it's fantastic. Just in terms of the staff numbers, let me break that down a little bit more. The growing, people involved in the growing aspect is about 6, but that's not 6 full-time equivalents because all of us get involved in veg box packing. Some of us get involved in driving, in working in the shop and so forth. So we're all multidisciplined. But I would say in terms of the veg operation, both in the market garden and in the field scale, it's probably equivalent to about 3.5 to 4 full-time equivalents over the week. So in terms of scaling up, I would say that I am naturally a little bit risk averse, and I rely on processes to help me get through the management of teams. I'm definitely a little bit more sort of introverted, and so I use processes to help me get to that, help manage the team. So why do we want to increase staff on the farm? For me, it's about resilience and to be able to cope with holidays and illness. It's about sharing the workload and, frankly, achieving more, because I was very much struggling to make ends meet before we started scaling up. It's great to have sounding boards, extra feedback, new ideas, new energy, and what we're really trying to do here is avoid burnout, so that the more people you have on the team, the less you can share it out and feed off each other. And I guess in the wider picture, employing local people helps the local economy, and getting more organic veg grown and sold locally is great for the industry and great for the organic movement. Okay, so for us, there were 2 big hurdles to get over when we were starting to scale up in terms of employing people. It was really scary to go to 1 full-time employee, to see whether it will be affordable, to see whether we can keep active and productive all year round. It was a real challenge for us to think about how we can get over that step. And as soon as we did, that was the start of our growth on the farm, because we could then share the load out and be much more successful across the board. The next stage for us was going to above 4 people, because then you've really got to grow up as an organization in terms of HR. You've got to have staff handbooks, you've got to have all the pensions and all this sort of stuff in place. And for us to get over, we were always hovering about the 3 employee level, because that just seemed like such a huge administrative burden that we didn't really want to get involved in. And actually, we have to thank the pandemic for that, because that forced us to go over that threshold. But I have to say that in hindsight, the admin and the bureaucracy of doing that was well worth it, because we are such a much more resilient and strong business because we have a bigger team. So in terms of taking the plunge into widening the team or increasing the team size, this slide is kind of a little bit backwards, because it sounds like we wanted to do things to get a bigger team, but it's kind of the other way around. We knew that we had to reorganize our business to get ready to have a bigger team and be more successful, and that really involves switching our model to a steady income model. We used to be very much wholesale and whole field scale crop production. We moved to direct sales, and really that we wanted to drive the sales and the revenue so that we could build up our team size and essentially be more successful. And really that's built around two things. That's built around our farm shop, which my wife Kate has spearheaded, and has now got to the stage where it is resourced on her own. So that's why Kate is here and not in the shop. That's on Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And then also our veg box scheme, which I set up with the veg box scheme with Steve, and we've worked through trying to create a really strong online offer and retail offer for veg boxes, and thankfully that's really strong at the moment and working really well. So essentially, to grow the team, I wanted to make certain that we had the revenue there so that we could support it and not bite off more than we could chew. The interesting thing about expanding the team is it allowed us to diversify much more in terms of the way we grow and to keep busy all year. So in particular, the no-dig market garden allowed us to do a lot more work in the winter months, so that we're saving effort in the busy growing season, in the April, May, June. So there's a lot you can do in the winter to keep busy so that you're saving that precious tight time in the early spring. But with that diversification meant that our cropping window was far wider, and the range of produce that we're able to produce is amazing. It's well over 300 varieties. And so that our boxes in our farm shop look full and plentiful. The other thing is that we matched the available skills. So the people that we were finding, or that people were finding us, tended to want to work in a market garden. At least when we were scaling up, there was a dearth of resource who were comfortable with field scale production, driving tractors and the like. And the people who were probably had their own business or were working with a much larger organization. So we made sure that the market garden, when we started it up, was a place where we could match the skills that we were seeing coming through the door. And even though it's very labor intensive, the intensity of getting the crops off a small area was very high. So now it's fantastic that after some 6-7 years, the market garden, rather than being a loss leader of extra variety to sell our potatoes and onions and leeks, is now a real profit center, and it's really leading, it's really supporting the farm in a very meaningful way. So that's fantastic. The one thing that we also did in terms of scaling up was being pragmatic. I wanted to make sure that we had the revenue stream. Because we weren't doing exclusively wholesale, we were doing retail. We were using the wholesale markets to prop up or bridge the gaps in our farm shop and veg boxes, so that we were maintaining our revenue stream and therefore being able to pay payroll, so that we can then close the gap and increase our capability of growing while we did that. So being pragmatic about that really helped us sort of extend or make it possible to have the capability to grow more. And part of that being pragmatic is diversifying our income streams when the demand drops. When the holidays come along, all routines go out the window, and all of a sudden you've got a real problem selling stuff. So particularly in the early days, we were doing things like weddings. But even now, we do seasonal suppers, tours and other events on the farm in the summer to bring people back onto the farm, see that you exist, hopefully buy your food, and keep the revenue going. So that was it was important to us to make sure that we're carrying those troughs in the year. Well, that's it. So when the team gets larger, we had to really start looking at our working processes. But where it started from is that if the business relied on me to be part of all the activities on the farm, it was not going to be sustainable. If I was ill or not there, the whole thing would fall apart. Equally, if it relied on carbon copies of me to scale up, that was not sustainable either. It's not feasible to ask someone to do a 12-hour day and then go home and do the accounts, for example. It's just not going to happen. So we had to completely change around how we work to make sure that we're doing 8-hour days and the like, and it becomes achievable. And I think part of this is actually trying to design me out of the system. Can the system work without me? And if it can, then that's success. I think that's what I've really tried to do throughout the last 15 years, and hopefully will continue, and then I'll become more and more irrelevant, hopefully. The one thing that I've really been very grateful for is the leadership unit, and that's our partners. The partnership, there's 4 of us, and to share the burden of big decisions, to share the responsibility of tough decisions in the business. It's really important to have the feeling that people have got your back and you're doing it together. And not all of those partners are salary making, or take a salary. So my sister is a partner, and she really helps guide with a different perspective how we move forward as a business. And so I would definitely recommend, don't do it on your own at that leadership level. Have support, because it can be a lonely business trying to manage everything in your head. Once you've got that there, you've got the team. You've got to try and make life easier, because if you don't make life easier, you become less efficient. So the way that you work needs to be achievable. You know, you've got to be able to lift things, you've got to be able to move things, you've got to be able to complete the task in time before 9 o'clock at night, for example. So what we did is we made appropriate investment in tools and software. The tools, I think we saw a lot of that in the first session, so a lot of crossover there. And that would include mechanization, wheels, pushing things around rather than carrying things, tools in the harvesting, and communication. So we've done actually a lot of emphasis on software and technology, because the software is fantastic at being able to take a complex system and make it simple and make it part of the communication. 5 minutes, oh dear, gosh. And the thing that we tried to do is really to prioritize the things that we need to look at. We wanted to see what we're spending a lot of time doing so that we could then focus on the right areas. So the other part of the team is I really try and empower the team. We have areas of responsibility so that people have ownership of areas, they have focus of it. We draw in resource from the whole team, but there is focus in areas so that we're not dropping the ball. Communication tools, really important for empowerment. And I like to say this, is that I like to encourage mistake recognition. It's really important to say that there is a problem. It's not a blame game, it's an opportunity to improve. And I think that's really important. When I look at streamlining processes for the team, I look for the quick wins. Where are we doing repetitive tasks, time-consuming tasks, bottlenecks? So what is stopping something else further down the line happening? Where are there time constraints? Is there setup and takedown time? And if I see those, then I know that there's instantly going to be improvements that we can make. And so I'm an engineer by background, so I just look at that and go, right, we can break this process apart and then start to make it more efficient. And then we can take small incremental changes, measure it to see whether we're making a difference. And the good thing for me is that the team are doing this, and it's not just driven from top down. So that's really important. So one example, I've just got 2 examples and I'll finish, is around the particular holes that we had in team communication and how we plug those gaps. So we have a weekly stand-up meeting that sets the framework of the week, who's in, who's out, what the harvest needs are, and any other events that are happening, plus feedback from the last week. And then those minutes are disseminated because not everyone is there on a Monday. So that's a big part of the week. And sometimes I have to be forced to be part of that meeting. I hate meetings, but it's very, very useful for the team and for me. Trello, we use Trello for to-do task management. That's for ad hoc tasks, things like maintenance, fix the polytunnel doors, order seeds, order bags for the packing, like that, things like that. WhatsApp groups we use a lot, and they're focused, so not everyone is seeing everything, so we can focus the messaging. Google Sheets we use a lot, and we collaborate a lot, so harvest list, stock control, crop rotation, and crop spacing, and calculators of crop spacing are all on Google Sheets, so everyone can access those, everyone can see those, and it's part of the communication. Freshdesk is a customer support software, so customers email in, and we manage that in Freshdesk, and essentially there's a team of us that manage customer support. And we very, very rarely miss any customer support issues because we're using technology to manage that. And it's very easy to see when tickets open up again and we can manage it. So fantastic. And lastly, our VegBox platform, Growing Good, is where, and I'm actually part of Growing Good, so I've got a very vested interest in the platform. But that's where the whole team can go in and look at the required process, produce that's needed, when it's needed, for which delivery run, for which day. So we can break up the data very easily so that we can make sure that we get it together in the right format. And just finally, I'll go through this very quickly. This is just an example of harvesting. So again, looking at those processes, the setup and takedown time, because it might take a long time to set everything up, get all your things together to go out to the field, it might take 10 minutes to get out of the field, I want to reduce the number of times we spend going to harvest an item in a week. I want to only do it once, not twice, 3 times, because if we're doing that setup and takedown every time, it really extends out your time. Or if we're going out and we can't reduce that setup and takedown time, combine that with other things that we're going to harvest in the same place. So make sure we're looking at the list and what we've got to do to be really efficient about using that wasted time. It's a bit like the fixed costs of time. So if we increase our active time in the activity, then the fixed costs relatively get smaller. Accurate numbers, so consulting the VegBox platform and the stock control, make sure we're picking the right amount. Transport and tools, I think you showed that great in the first session, exactly the same. But make sure you've got your extra crates, your knives. We don't want to have to go back to the packing shed to get more stuff. We just want to make sure that we're spending the most of our time being useful. Grading, it's really important to grade in the field. It's better light. The waste goes into the ground and gets recycled. If it goes into the packing shed, it's waste. If it goes onto the harvest list, then the harvest list is inaccurate and you can get wrong. So it's worth spending extra time grading in the field so that the packing is quicker. Similarly, packing, is there a way to transport the vegetables to increase the quality? Or is there a way of spending a little bit of extra time in the field to make packing quicker? So for example, if you spend a bit of extra time aligning your beans in a crate, in the packing shed, you can just grab a lump and put it in the scales and it becomes much quicker. And for us, that time packing is so precious. Doing 400 boxes in a day is a lot, that we really want to take out some of that activity from the packing day and take it out into the field. Weight estimation, really important. So we pick into standard size boxes, so we know a crate of carrots is 20 kilos, we just count the crates. We have portable weighing scales for luggage that we weigh our kale and PSB out in the field so that we know we've got the right amount. Sometimes it's very difficult to know whether you've got 10 or 15 kilos. So that's important. And sometimes we take out scales to the market garden so that we're weighing out there rather than going back to the packing shed, realizing that we're 5 kilos short and then having to go back again. These are all really obvious things, but what I want to say is that they really add up to something amazing, because all of a sudden you've got 20% extra time because you've actually looked at this, shone a light on it, and while you're thinking about it, you can really make fantastic gains. I'll just quickly go through this. Harvest bags means that there's less walking up and down the field, so you're harvesting more. That's the TerraTech. Harvest list, the whole team can see it. We can see what we've harvested in a single place. WhatsApp groups, really important. So the harvest team might say, there's to the shop team, there's stuff in the cooler, new stuff in there for you available. There might be a new vegetable that's available for the veg boxes next week coming on board. Let me know. And that's just a communication tool. And then finally, feedback is a major part of our system. So from the shop team, if we picked too much or underpicked, from the packing team, if the grading wasn't right or that something could be improved, or from the customers if the quality wasn't great. So that all that feedback goes back in. And again, it's just that incremental change. And if we get better, great. But always doing that incremental change. So that's it.
Okay, hello everyone. Hope you're all excited to start your upscaling journeys. Who is a grower in the room, just out of interest? Who's sort of like, would call themselves like market gardening, sort of less than a couple of acres? Who's sort of thinking of like upscaling or shifting it? Maybe. Cool. Okay, great. Well, I'm going to talk a bit about the economics. So we've heard a bit about the practical. We've heard a bit about the kind of systems and the people upscaling and the organisational, which are really critical. And I think often sort of underlooked at as like, it's our classic farm phobia of economics, of money, of how we actually pay ourselves and make it all happen. But I'm very passionate about it, so we're going to nerd out on economics for a bit. Hope you join me before lunch. I also studied economics and kind of went into farming, so it's kind of the bridging of my two worlds. I think the key message for me is about really optimizing rather than maximizing. So looking at these like systems, we can really optimize. It's not just about like increasing the turnover. There's many really high turnover farms. In fact, some of the highest turnover farms are some of the least profitable. It's about kind of maximizing that, looking at your overheads, inputs, how you manage the people side, the systems, the financial planning tools, how we look at like what crops we're going to grow, not just on ideology, but based on actual crop profitability indexes and things like that. So yeah, hopefully give you a few little practical takeaway tools, and really looking at kind of like how we develop those economic systems, but also like the mindset needed to kind of upscale. And for me, the upscale isn't just like growing bigger and bigger and bigger farms. It's more about kind of spreading out and sort of collaborating more. The more we upscale, the more relationships there are, the more kind of webs of like supply and producer cooperation there is. The more like bigger team farm we have, which I love that sort of like big team farm model. I'm very inspired by George's model. That's where we want to sort of, we're at a slightly smaller scale. We're more like 180 boxes. And we've upscaled from like 1/10 of an acre to 16 acres in pretty much a few whirlwind years, and gone from, I don't know, £30 revenue to 300 grand this year. That's now on this 16 acres. And actually, we do lots of stuff as part of Middle Ground Growers. We're a community interest company. But that's talking about just the veg income. We generate 200,000 from 9 acres cultivation. So I want to sort of like talk to a bit about like some of the economics behind that, and kind of what key indicators might be for like making the best we can within, you know, the difficult environment that is the growing world, but how we actually make that viable and really look after the people. We pay holiday pay, sick pay, and pension stuff now, and we're really like proud to be able to do like year-round livelihoods for quite a few people. We have 7 people employed, but we have about 4 that are through the year, which is really key. That was one of our key aims. We started collaboratively, so we wanted to go big and be like, we want to provide 4 livelihoods, and we have this area of land. And also how to like balance, the kind of like still keep those like ethos. Because I think one of the big themes about scaling up is like that fear of like, it's going to get watered down, or you're not going to be able to do things as well, or it's not going to be as agroecological or perfect, or beautiful, no-till, idealistic. But actually what we found is we can actually resource ourselves better to do things like invest in better circular systems, invest in better tools and things to actually do things more min-till, to actually do things better. But we had to let go of a bit of perfectionism to kind of get to that point of like getting over that. So don't let perfectionism be the sort of the blocking of progress. Actually, getting out of that can actually help you go back to it, but in a more quality way. Hopefully. So, firstly, financial models. Who knows what their like financial model is as their like farm or business or any hands? A few, yeah. And there's financial models, and then there's kind of like the business structures as well. So in terms of business structures, who's like a sort of sole trader or kind of like not sort of registered, but just as a sort of individual? Anyone like a company? Community interest companies? Charities? Any of us? Shout them out we can, if you like. Cool, okay. So there's lots of different models. There's from one side of the spectrum, we've got like fully self-funded enterprises that I believe almost no farm actually fits into this. There's always some ways that we actually like, there's always like some land payments or some things that actually are needed. So no farms are really fully on the self-funded just through the sale of products. It's very tricky. I think we've got to like embrace different sort of models to actually get beyond that. There are some, and what we do is our economics is we kind of keep all of the veg growing and all of the actual enterprise and the food production. That's all as like kind of one bubble, one financial management. And that's managed through one set of accounts and everything. And so that's to make sure that that is kind of protected so it can actually self-run itself and be viable. And then we have another sort of strand of the business which does other stuff, like if we want to do a wetland, we've got a big grant for that. So that kind of keeps its own separate budget. So we're kind of, on the other end of the spectrum, we're like a more mixed model. We're a community interest company, so we get grant funding for like things like our social aims, if we want to do like land access for youth groups that are disadvantaged in our area, and have them visit, we'll do grants, or if we want to do a wetland or a pollinator project, we'll run that separately, rather than cross-subsidising and like using the veg income to then like this marginal amount you get from like selling carrots to then like do all of this social and environment and ecological work. It's really tricky to like, it's so easy to do when you're doing it agroecologically to just let that be a funding loop, and that will deplete the business. So we try and keep it really separate, keep the sort of more holistic aims, and keep that, even though it feels a bit counterintuitive. So that's our kind of model, it's like sort of middle ground model. But there's also things that are like fully grant-funded farms, more social farms, very reliant on this like constant applications, this kind of like funding cycle, so it's not as resilient. Crowdfunding, we use crowdfunding for our startup costs. We wanted to set up the systems really properly, like set up the solar barn, set up delivery bikes, kind of do things quite differently, get the equipment and tools we needed. So we actually used crowdfunding. We raised £95,000 with amazing community support. And that kind of helped us set the systems up for a very long-term, perennial project. But we kept that separate from like the actual running costs, which are funded through the actual veg subscriptions. There's also loads of other models. There's like investment options. There's seen some really cool like community shares stuff, like Soul Farm are doing at the moment, community benefit society, and cooperative models. So there's loads, but like the main message here is like try and get clear on what your financial model is. If you want to run as a fully self-funded enterprise and farm, and just do it through the sale of carrots, then like do that and nail the economics and as much as you can and do it really well. And if you want to do a more mixed model, or if you're actually doing all these other benefits but you want to like try and get that funded, then embrace the funding for it. You need to get supported. I've got a few sort of like key variables for success. So from us, we kind of take this like regenerative economics framework. So that's from like economic studies. I wanted to like really bring that into how we bring that into the farm on the day-to-day. And these are kind of what I have as these key variables. And these guys are kind of talked to them already. But the ones that I have is like labour approach is really key. If you have like the team are really like thriving and like wanting to give to it and feel like part of the project and feel autonomous, and really like when that's flowing, then everything like happens like magic and the motivation's there. It's the team cohesion is really important, which is all based around the relationships. So really looking after that core team container. And secondly, we've got like workflow, systems, and efficiency. So that comes from like the design. So we've like very much set up our systems as we upscaled, so that we have like really minimizing movements, which is what George talked about a bit, which is like that workflow from that field harvest. So we have it collected on a big trailer bike, goes onto the bike, It comes into the barn, it goes to the wash station, pack station, and then the bike can come right to the packing and get loaded up again for the transport out. And then we've got a van now as well, so that comes in and gets loaded up and goes out. So we can have like these systems that are very close to each other, that aren't like too squished in, but have like a really nice workflow from harvest through to that. So you've actually got to think of that workflow from like the very seed, which starts with like the planning and the crop planning and buying the seed, to that whole delivery, and it gets to the customer's door, and then the customer aftercare. There's probably like 20 different systems you've got to like try and think about a bit and like do as well as possible. And optimizing inputs and overheads. So that comes from real like financial planning rather than like blindly through the year, which is what we did in the early years. We'd just be like, oh yeah, we'll need that, we'll buy that, we'll need that, we'll buy that, we'll do this. Or instead, like if you can make much more informed decisions and have all the information with you and say, oh, actually, I know the budget we've got for irrigation this year. That means we're still profitable. I know the budget we've got for this. That means we're still in the green, and I can spend that. We could decide to spend more and free up budget somewhere else, but that's got to kind of come from somewhere rather than it just being like a farm sink where you have all the money comes in, and it's very easy to do that. So yeah, really like the financial planning helps with that because it gives you way more tools to make decisions in the day-to-day. And we've already mentioned like the lean farm approach. So just little examples of things like having all the same standardized crate size so you can really stack and make best use of space, not having like 60 tools that do the same thing, just like cut them all out and just use like one or two really good ones you can really focus on and hone and with quality, not have like loads of bits of machinery or all sorts of stuff that you might use one day or something. Just have like, what's the system here, what do we actually need, maybe we need to invest in a better tool for it if we've got 10 that half do the job. And suitable infrastructure, productive use of that space, getting that design really right at the start. I've mentioned the relationships. It's also about the sort of relationship building, like externally to the wider community, bringing them along on the vision. We sort of started with this very collaborative community approach, and then when it came to like upscaling, then we could do the crowdfunder and raise the money and start that. So the sort of community input is really key. And the biggest benefit of the crowdfunder was, obviously the money's amazing for the startup and for the scale-up, but actually all of the community links, we've got these 500 people like gunning for us and different skill sets and all these sort of things. So actually any ways you can do to bring those people on board really helps when you have different situations and skill sets needed. Reputation for quality and consistency. So really, we didn't do that enough in the early years of like really focusing on like what goes out, and actually now we're kind of upscaling, going to more wholesale markets, and sort of bigger supply, so that's really helped us. Actually, those relationships help us to kind of step up our game a bit from just like veg box supply and just they can have that, and actually just now we're trying to reach more people beyond the converted from like our just initial CSA scheme. So we really need to change the approach to quality and standards and labelling and box labelling for wholesale and consistency and all those sort of things. So those are sort of some of the considerations with scaling up the supply and sort of routes to market. Organisation and planning has been really key, both from like the organisational and people side, and like the calendar, big shared Google Calendar on the drive and things like that, but also having very visible whiteboards and systems in place people can interact with on the day-to-day. And then finally, profitable crops. So I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. And in terms of the more like crops and the growing, so I came from the more market garden background, so now our market garden's about 2 acres, no-till market garden, so it's kind of upscaled from that 1/10 of an acre, and then we have another like 7 acres of field scale, so it's still quite smallish scale in a way, like we could do more field scale, but we kind of like tried to optimize those systems. But with the market gardening, we've really learned from this kind of like lean approach to cropping of how we actually like really maximize the crops, how we make that amount of money per acre, and how we employ so many people per acre is kind of actually focusing on certain crops that we do like for bigger quantities and for wholesale, and also looking at like multi-cropping and really like focusing on soil biology so we can get a lot of yield per metre squared. So particularly for the market garden this is relevant, but we try and also keep some of it for the field mentality because actually we can then turn over a lot more from every acre. So a few of those factors are just here. So looking at your high value crops, looking at crops that grow quickly, it's less time to manage, less time to weed, less time to everything. You get your harvest and your income much quicker. Radish is my favourite. 25 days, you sow it, and then it's there, and it's £200 a bed of radish bunches. So short days to maturity really help. And having a functional diversity. So rather than just growing every single variety under the sun, we've really like reduced the number of varieties every year, which is quite tricky. It's like saying bye to a friend, or, oh, no, not the cauliflower, they've got to go. We're losing money on them. No, it makes no sense. So looking at like the functional diversity, so still having that beautiful agroecological biodiversity on your farm, which we have. We're still growing, over 30 crops, but really having like a functional diversity. And actually there's like 5 or 6 crops we really focus on and really do like huge wholesale quantities. Someone's having like 60 kg of perpetual spinach going out a week, a few hundred bunch of radish a week. So some of our wholesale days are really big. It's like a few grand, you're just harvesting it all, coming back, and often they're cut and come again crops. So they're also coming back next week in the summer, which is amazing. And you have a successional cropping, so we've always got those kind of key crops in stock, which I'll go through those crops a little bit in a moment. And also, of course, as we go more into field-scale cropping, and obviously we do year-round veg boxes, so the more we can bring in through that length of the income season as well. And like Rita said, you kind of need to add in another factor for that. And the low-input crops, so some crops we might get rid of just based on the amount of time or the amount of faffing around, like bean poles or bean wires and things like that. So actually we got rid of climbing beans, we just do bush beans, things that are really much more easy to maintain, lower inputs. We've really just tried to focus on those crops, or things that don't need really heavy feeding all the time or lots of attention. Crops we can kind of just sow when they get on with it, which will be different for every soil, but for us, there's certain crops that really work well. Optimal labour inputs, so obviously not having too little labour and not having way too much. When there's way too much, it kind of creates an environment of everyone's just very relaxed, and everyone's and people don't really have that purpose and drive of there needs to be a bit of that busyness and intent to keep everyone that feeling of really, we're here for a purpose, we've achieved a lot today, feel that real satisfaction from the work. Perfect. Cool. Yes, those are some of the factors for the crops. And I want to talk briefly about one tool that you might be able to take away. Does anyone analyse their crop profitability? Yeah, a little bit. Anyone do it beyond just to speculating or reflecting from oh yeah, tomatoes must be good, they get a lot of money. Yeah, a few, yeah. This is something, again, we've embraced a lot more over the years. And also, Rita was talking about gathering data, so the more you can do that, it doesn't have to be actually really complex. It's actually just gathering those observations and those sales income data. But we have I think it's simple because I started with something way more complex, but it's kind of boiled down like a kind of profitability index. So every crop that we grow has its profitability score, gets these ratings, people hold up these cards. And that's largely based on the actual value we get, the actual price per kilo, and the quantity, the kilograms per acre, and then the labour efficiency and the input efficiency are really key. So they're a bit more subjective, and they're gathered from all of our data and observations, and I keep a constant Google Notes thing on my phone that I can just input onto. But the labour efficiency is how many paid human hours, which is labour's our biggest cost. It's about 50% of our the overall business costs and things like that. So we're spending over 100 grand on labour this year. So the labour efficiency is really the key thing in that growing. How many human hours per amount of crop and income we're getting. And you'll find there's probably a lot of crops you're doing that actually have a very low labour efficiency, but they might have a good high value per pound, but actually when you weigh them up, they're not as an efficient or productive crop as you think. And input efficiency is, again, how many resources or time or, and this is not the time, this is more actual physical inputs we're putting into it. So it might be the seed cost is really expensive for this, or it requires compost every year, the salads, or etc. And then for each crop, you can give it a variable. You might want to choose different variables based on your context. You can make your own metric, but give each variable a rating, 1 is low, 5 is high. So a very high labour efficiency crop. Radish might be, you can see a theme here. That might be a 4 or a 5 for labour efficiency. Cucumbers might be quite low, 1 or 2, because it's quite a lot of working cucumbers. And then you can just add up those scores, and then you get numbers for each crop. And it's quite simple, it's quite fun. And once you have a spreadsheet with all those numbers on, you can just plug them in each year. If they change, you can look at that. You can be actually we spent loads of more time on bush beans this year, so da-da-da-da. But once you have that crop profitability index, you can really make better decisions. Basically, all this is about resourcing you to make better decisions in the now, in the live, when you're really busy, on the fly, and deciding these things on the farm. so you can really like nail the economics. And then that's the kind of detail level. But then when we zoom out to the pattern level, the sort of more macroeconomics, so cash flow, so to do like sort of cash flow analysis for their farm or businesses. Yeah, a little bit. So that's just to see like how, it's basically just like, there's the overall yearly profit and loss, but there's also like the actual flow of the cash through the season. Are we in the green on this individual week or month? So a quick example, like this was, I think, from last year. So our weekly income was 2,500 from the veg boxes, 1,500 from the wholesale. So our inflow for that week is 4,000. Each week we employ 25 days labour, so that's £2,500 cost, including the employment costs. And then what we do, the key part is we like average the rest of our weekly costs, so your overheads and your direct costs, which are like your sort of seed inputs, utilities, water, all the unexpected costs that often get missed. We have them all on a big sheet. And then you want to like average them out over your weeks. So 1 week of those average costs from the year for us is about £900. So that leaves us with an idea of actually what we need to earn each week to be in the green. And I'd say you should be aiming for profit rather than aiming for like zero, because if we have an average cash flow of 600, then we know we've got budget at the end of the year for, there's unexpected costs, or for like investing in better stuff, or machinery or equipment or people, or just like a buffer cost, kind of fat for the winter, I call it. So yeah, I'd aim for like a green with that, which sounds obvious. Cool, so wrapping up. And then there's the bigger kind of picture, which is the profit and loss, so the trading income. So it's just really making sure you're sort of monitoring that each year. So again, we like rapidly upscaled that, sort of almost doubling every year, the income. So the total income went from 32 grand 2021, 215, we're actually over 300 this year. So it's slightly different, but the actual veg income is 200. So the point there is like, those sort of numbers are simple, but then to actually do that doubling requires a lot of like these economic systems and these kind of monitoring and planning and financial stuff to kind of make sure you're upscaling well, because it really hit me, like George said, when you have like start suddenly employing lots of people, then you've got to like be generating enough revenue. You've got to be aiming for that like weekly cash flow to do it. So I think I'll wrap up there and yeah, pass over for any questions and stuff. We're not getting crowdfunding. These some nice photos up.
Great. Thanks, Hamish. Thanks to all our speakers. That was really rich and, a lot of common themes coming out, but also particular things for your context. So I'm going to open it up to questions from the floor. We also have some questions online, so we're going to kind of alternate. But I'll start within the room. Does anyone want to start? Can I take the woman in the white hat?
Going to shout there, but I've got a question about ELM's environmental land management schemes and market gardens. So DEFRA recently announced that, they've kind of, it's essentially the 5 hectare limit that used to be part of the basic payment scheme, that doesn't exist for environmental land management schemes. So theoretically, small market gardens can apply for government subsidies. Obviously, there's a lot of admin involved, and a lot of the payments are by hectare. So the bigger you are, the more worthwhile it is the time taken to apply for these subsidies if you're a larger farm. But I was wondering, do you think that this ELMS could offer an opportunity for market garden businesses, or do you think that there's something else the government could be doing to support more market gardens and their business viability, such as investing in local infrastructure so you've got more routes to market, kind of startup funds for small enterprises or innovation funds? What do you think the government could do to help market gardens be more viable businesses?
Great. Who would like to take that? Hamish,
a
with
couple
your
of things.
economics?
I mean, is mic on? We've got a few things from our experiences. Like we're on the ELMS on like a mid-tier countryside stewardship, and then we're also on the sustainable farming incentive. And And actually, I think, I mean, yeah, a lot of them are hectarage based, but actually a lot of them are also just like one-off payments, so it could really benefit small ones. Like an integrated pest management report for the farm is just one unit, and I think it's like just over £1,000. I think, if I got that right. So there are those kind of like one-off item things, or like, you know, creating small ponds and stuff is actually, it's a similar payment for quite a big farm or quite a small farm to do a small pond and things like that. So I think actually it can lend itself really well. I think it's another one of those things that a lot of the farmers shy away from like making the maximum use of. Like even I just like realised this year, I was like, oh, we're missing out on like £3,500 once I had finally the time to look into it. So I think, yeah, like getting help with it when you need and also accessing those payments. But I'd say in market gardening, it's like there's quite like high costs per acre. So like compared, the farming schemes are kind of also designed for those like, you know, quite broad acreage sort of things. So actually in terms of like funding a startup cost for a market garden, I think we need to look at other funding things, because the majority of your funding that you need to start up a market garden won't be to produce that pest report. It will be the sort of infrastructure, the machinery stuff. And, you know, like Rita was saying, you can actually do those things and those upscaling with like, it's not a massive budget. It might seem massive, but actually like in the grand scheme of things in terms of starting a business and that investment, it's pretty small. So if there are those, like you said, those startup grants or scale-up, I think scale-up grants will be really important. I think there's lots of people that can find a way in. I think it's almost good in a way. This might be unpopular to like start on a shoestring budget. Like I just started on absolutely nothing, and if I was given a huge budget in the first year, I would have made so many much more bigger mistakes and stuff. So it's quite good to do that, and then like after the second or third year, then have like suddenly like a really nice big crowdfunder budget and stuff to do it a bit more properly and still make mistakes. But yeah, I almost think the scale-up grant is almost more important of that thing of like, okay, you've done a year or two, you've done the traineeship, we need the funding for that too, which is a separate issue, but you've done that, and then there's this like, you've also got more of a business case and a plan. I think a lot of people in the room probably would be in that case where like a scale-up thing would help them really optimize. You might even not be doing more acreage, but you might double your income through some sort of like scale-up of like systems and organization and like help with the payments and all those things. So yeah, I think the scale-up grant route would be really good if anyone government in the room or anything.
Do either of you want to add to that?
I think that's fantastic. I do agree with, I think, extra infrastructure in the community for like funding farmers markets, for example, or something similar. I think that would be very useful. But
great. We're going to take the next question online.
Yeah, there's a question about 12-month cropping and crops during the Hungry Gap. From Ilsa, how do you deal with animals during the Hungry Gap? That's their main problem. If covering crops in straws or other covers, the mice get the benefit of the crops.
Great. I'm going to let Rita speak.
We, annoyingly, we're quite lucky at Pitney because we're, yeah, we don't seem to struggle. We're right next to a path which has got quite high traffic. There's a woodland just behind our field, and it's got deer, there's rabbit all around us, but for some reason we're quite lucky where we are. But yeah, pests through 12 months. I mean, standing crops, yeah. Oh, sorry. Standing crops, pigeons, an issue. Sorry, struggling to get my thoughts together. Trying to think. Can I pass over?
Yeah,
Sorry,
sure,
I'm struggling to get my thoughts together.
We have problems with the bigger animals, and particularly in the Hungry Gap, so the pigeons, deer, rabbits, and we found that the only real way of trying to control those is covers for particularly brassica crops. We have a very controversial banger that's very loud if you get too close to it to keep pigeons off, but even that is not that successful. I think what we've done is we've just sort of accepted that there will be some losses, and we do the best we can, and we always try to grow too much. If we grow too much, then there'll be stuff for us and stuff for the ecosystem around us.
Yeah, and obviously these things have an impact on our index for those Hungry Gap crops.
Yeah. And it might be the case that like there is like observing those like problems that we see of like, oh, this crop just always gets eaten by this pest, and maybe just that's meaning like growing a different crop or variety or like getting rid of that. Like, I think we can be very like persistent as growers, which is a great strength, but I think we could like keep going with something that's not necessarily working because we love the cauliflower or something. I think someone's just go for the hardy ones that look healthy through the year for you, and maybe focus on them, and then you can reintroduce the others at a later date. Maybe the pests have gone away a little bit. We have a deer fence around the site, so we're very lucky. When we put the orchard in, we wanted to protect all of that, so that does really help a lot. And we're quite open ground, so yeah.
I would add to that, we've got a problem with sweet corn earworm at the moment, and we've scaled down massively our sweet corn, but I still want to keep it there because I want to encourage the predator that will come and eat it eventually. So I've not eliminated it from the rotation, but I'm having less of it, and I know I'm going to have huge losses, but I want eventually the ecosystem to come and solve the problem.
Great. From the room, at the back.
In terms of spending money on mechanical equipment, in terms of prioritizing that or other capital expenditure, what would you say is what's your process for working out what do you call it, return on investment, but the kind of the timeline of that return on investment? So, if I buy a tractor, should I expect to make a return on that within 1 year, 2 years? What's the process of making that decision? And then what would you say is, okay, I don't know, let's say I've got 10 grand to spend. What's the prioritization there? Obviously it's contextual, but in your guys' contexts.
Who would like to take that?
Yeah, I can say it more generally for there's so many of those investments, so it's a good question about how to prioritize that if you're wanting to scale up. I'd say it's looking at, a bit like George mentioned, looking at your bottlenecks and looking at where you're maybe you're just spending loads of time on this particular thing. Maybe it's the mowing because you've got a really small mower, and then actually that flail mowing thing, will save 10 hours a month, so that's £100 a month of labour, so you might get that back really quickly because it's £200 for a good flail mower or something. But there's other things that might be much longer payback time. In our experiences, they pay back pretty quick, and it's how we make the decision on that is how much of a sort of shortcut in our operations will this make. And it often becomes quite clear to us that once you know the operation well, I think you sort of understand the bottlenecks, and the more data you can gather for that and inform that decision, the better. But some were just really, quick wins are just like no-brainers of like, oh yeah, we put in like so much of our time into this weeding, so like this, you know, steerage hose just like makes money back almost in a week. It's like so quick. So, and some of them are more like, yeah, longer term, like a refrigerated van. That's obviously like, you know, £7,000 investment. It's going to take a bit longer, but the quality pays off, and the differences in customers probably pretty high. So, you know, within a year or two. But yeah, it's tricky to make. You kind of want to be resourced to make those really long-term things. Of like, there's so many things you can invest in that will make a return at some point. So you can technically justify any new purchase, but that's where it comes back to like that financial planning of like, oh, if you've like kind of understand a bit at least the budget for like what you do have for new implementation kit, then you can still put other stuff in. But yeah, I'd say with that like £10,000 budget, don't just look at just like the clear labour saving like implements, but also look at the the things that like might save that operation a lot of time. Like little things like our like order magnet strips where we can stick orders onto the wall, or like that's just like it just save like so much like looking and turning pages all around the floor, everywhere, and pages blowing away. Just having like a little chef order strip. So sometimes little things, little leverage things make quite a big shift. So like look at the easy wins if you're budget constrained, I guess. Yeah.
I'd like to add one thing to that, is that I quite like to look at a system approach. So standard bed widths. I was quite jealous of your setup because you'd obviously started from fresh and you've got everything lined up. Yeah. The downside of looking at a systems approach is sometimes you need several machines to make it work. But I would always try and make sure something fits into a system. And ideally, if a tool is multi-use, you're not using it for one thing, then it's more flexible.
Great. Online.
From Luke and Sarah, any tips on the best, easiest ways to mobilise volunteers? At my farm, this is almost a full-time job.
Mobilising volunteers. You use...
I have to say I'm terrible at it. I've got a fantastic a member of the team who's really good at coordinating the volunteers. And it's only since she took that on board that we've been successful. What we've done is that in our mailers and our social media, we've talked about it. And then people have come forward and offered their time. And it's amazingly enriching. But like you say, if it is burdensome, like it was when I was managing it, it almost wasn't worth it. It took up more time than it was worth. But the person who's managing it now does a really good job. It's one of her areas of responsibility, and she's much more successful at it than I am.
Food. If you offer soup, we literally started offering food and like hot soup, and then like the volunteer numbers doubled. If you're really desperate, offer a beer at the end of the day.
Can I add to that a little question about like, do you feel like volunteers? So you don't have volunteers at Pitney, but you do at the other. Like, do you feel that there's a financial contribution, or is it about building community? Or somewhere in between?
Well, for us, we do offer a discount in the shop. Okay. At least 2 of our volunteers decline that. They just want to be with us. So I think it very much is more about community than a financial return. I think if it was about financial return, it might seem to be a little bit sort of relying on low cost labor to do that. I think it's much more about being part of the community for us.
Yeah, very similar. So all the operations just happen on the staff days, and then the volunteer days are a little bit more self-led. Like they might want to mulch the trees, and it enables us to like look after some of the wider, maybe also more beautiful aspects of the site. But sometimes they might really want to like harvest or be involved, have like quite like good purpose, which also helps bring more people in. But yeah, it's not in a way that's reliant on it. It's sort of in a way that it's more for the sort of social and ecological and like holistic community aims of the farm. But yeah, I think you have got to be careful with the volunteers. I think you've got to do it like in the right way, so you're not like you are at the end of the day putting like valuable, paid staff time or staff time into it. So making sure it really does work for the farm as much as you can in your system. We actually sort of run it also separately as like almost part of some of the ecological projects as well. So if we, for example, for a lot of the tree planting will happen through the volunteer days, or a lot of the wetland creation and wildflower sowing. So we try and focus the volunteer activities more on that side of the farm to try and keep it as distinct as possible.
Yeah, that's really interesting. From the room. You can just wait for the mic so that we can hear you. Thank you.
I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about, it's obviously highly specific to each farm, but like the relative profitability of tractor beds, lower labour input, bigger scale, as compared to no dig, flipping them really quickly, more labour intense.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting that all 3 of the farms here have both. And George, you touched on the benefits of those different areas, so maybe we'll start with you.
For me, it's all about diversity. If you're stuck on one system and one mode, you're going to come unstuck one year. That you get a lot of resilience in having a diverse way of growing, diverse range of crops, diverse people, diverse routes to market. For us, our only resilience is about that diversity.
I'd say potentially it's also highly related to your market. I'd say like if you've got lots of intensive cropping where, for example, radishes, you've got loads that come ready in one go. You need to have a market where you can sell 500 bunches of radishes a week. If you're on the outside skirts of a city, maybe that's a good one, or a box scheme, that's a good one. Whereas with field scale veg, when you've got those crops that are lower in value, if you can make the most of making them super cheap to produce and quick to harvest. And then I think one of the reasons that they're more profitable for us is that we're kind of in that nice position of being a wholesale operation, but we don't rely on a middleman, so we're selling direct but wholesale. So we're able to charge a price that reflects that, and that really helps to make those crops, those lower value crops, more profitable. yeah, we've wanted, in a way, because our garden is so, we've got the market garden space, well, I think all three, and then there's a gateway up to our top field where we do the kind of field scale operation. And I've been trying to think this year, how could we put a timer on the gate that you just press every time you go through to that, so we could work out actually the profit versus labour hours. But it feels like it's complicated to work out actually how much labour input and how much it's costing you versus what you're getting. But yeah.
I'm going to ask for a question for somebody who hasn't. Oh,
can I quickly jump in on that one?
Quickly jump in.
So yeah, really good question, Humphrey. I think for us, the market garden, we've got the numbers for like the labour time and the sort of the income from it. So the market garden makes £105,000 from a much smaller area of the land. So it's 2 acres out of that area, and it's because of a lot of those like focus crops and that high productivity, and we give a lot to the soil as well. So it's very productive, and the fields are about 95,000 from a much bigger area. But the labour time we put in, it's about just over 70% of the labour time of the growing into the market garden. So a lot more costs going into that, and also compost stuff and things like that. But we have also had a lot of time spending on like tractors and machinery and fixing, and so the unexpected costs of the field. I think when the field's working really well, then it's producing a lot more, and it's different sort of crops. It's more year-round. So that's why we really like having both. And sometimes, like the market garden, you can get the really early crops. The soil warms quicker. Our springtime, we make way more money from the market garden. Now, with most of our income from the field, from now, for the next few months.
Great, thanks. A final question for somebody who hasn't asked a question at ORFC before, or someone who's new to the conference, or someone... Anyone fit into that category? No, okay. One online then, and then we'll finish.
From Y Grower, I'd like to ask about staff turnover and how easy it's been to find those willing to work seasonally or part-time.
Staff's one of our biggest issues that we deal with, I'd say. And it's one of the major benefits that we've had from scaling up, in a way, is that we've been able to offer a year-round position. We do, I should say, reduce the hours for that person during the winter, so it relies on them being up for doing that. But it's been amazing now that we've got someone who we can keep for at least, well, hoping they'll stay longer, so that time that we put into training them up into our system, we can kind of get back. But yeah, seasonal labour is a struggle, especially when you're more rural, to find trained people who can move to work with you and be able to afford local housing. We've managed it so far, but yeah, it's tricky. We've always managed to have someone that actually lives locally anyway to work with us as well, and that's been massively useful because it means that we can call if someone's sick or something like that.
Yeah, I think for us, we have had some staff with us like quite a number of years. We've actually had a lot turning over quite recently, so we're kind of having a bit of a rejig. I think we don't struggle to find like the seasonal growers. Actually, we have loads of applicants for that sort of thing. There's a skills gap, just like there is the upscaling gap. There's a gap of the field veg growers, and there's a skills gap of like having people that can like take a lead and responsibility on like some field veg or like the bigger scale stuff, or take like more responsibility or organisation within the business. So finding that the administrative skills. So we like pay admin time for like veg pots coordinator and for myself to do some parts of the business. So finding that is like gold dust. We've luckily had a very good veg pots coordinator who's now leaving, but after many a year. So I think there's not a labour gap in some areas, but there are in those more like that upscaling thing. So that's why we also need that, like there's the training. There's lots of new entrant training stuff that is all improving all the time, but then there's like the scale-up training as well. Just like the scale-up fund, we also need that like scale-up training, more like machinery training, all those sort of things. That's where we're really missing the people, I think.
Anything you want to add, George, before we close?
Well, the only thing I would say is it's worth investing in a consistent team. We over the last 2 years, we've had a pretty consistent team, and I don't think it's any coincidence that we've done much better because of that.
Okay, great, brilliant. That's it, I'm afraid. We have to close on time. Thank you so much for joining us. I think this session's been amazing, and thank you again to our speakers.